All right, so this might be a long one. God gave me a complex dream and gave me basically a huge download and then sent me on a research quest. And now I have 4 pages of notes because that's how that happens. All right, so I'm going to talk fast to kind of reduce this. All right, so in my dream, I had a chance to win $3 million for a science fair project. There were 3 groups. 2 of the groups were well on their way to solving the complex science problem. And then there was one girl who was solving something about Marie Antoinette. She needed a partner. So because I'd qualified to be a part of this contest and because she needed a group, I joined her. But I didn't understand or know exactly what she was solving. So I offered to do the presentation because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and they tell their story using just word imagery and things. And so I thought maybe that's what I can do for this presentation. But in order to do that, I had to go learn more about Marie Antoinette. So I went to a museum to learn about her. And I went to an exhibit. And in the exhibit, Marie Antoinette was riding through town. She looked like Paul Revere. She had a sword in her hand. She was riding through town. And she also had a twin that looked just like her. Also looked like Paul Revere riding a horse through town. And they both were shouting off with their heads. All right. And then I went to a next exhibit, and it showed a model train that was standing still, and you could see inside the train, and there were shocked wedding guests sitting in the train and decapitated bodies in the middle of each car. And the plaque explaining the exhibit was talking about how Marie Antoinette invaded a wedding, and before the wedding could be unified, or the couple could be unified in marriage, she went and she started decapitating some of the guests at the wedding. All right, and then they rode back on the train back home in shock with the carnage. All right. Sorry, my dreams are graphic. I don't know why God speaks to me this way. I don't know why, but it is. It is what it is. So, anyway, so I left the museum, which also was a library, grabbed a couple books, and thought, this needs to be done by the end of the weekend. I better get going, and I have a really tight timeline on this. All right, and so I left the building, and then the dream kind of changes roads. So I'm not going to go down that part of the dream. So let's talk about this dream, all right? All right, so I know nothing about Marie Antoinette. I know nothing about French history at all. I told my husband, I was like, I had a dream. He goes, oh dear, let me have it. And so I told him, and he's like, let me give you I was like, I think Marie Antoinette, wasn't she decapitated, like, by her husband who decapitated a lot of his wives? And he goes, let me set you straight on history. So he gave me like a 50 billion foot view and said, you need to research this. I said, yeah, I think that's what God is saying in this. So anyway, so let's talk about some of the key pieces in here. All right. So there's the $3 million prize and the 3 groups. When you see a number repeating like that, that's going to be kind of important. All right. So we have 3 means perfection and completion. 33 is kind of an important number. 33 was the age that our Savior sacrificed himself for us. So think in terms of completion here and perfection. And God is saying, I want your country to get more to completion and perfection. So I'm going to be sending you a message in this dream. All right. And so this dream is going to be a call to action for us. And we'll talk about that at the end. All right. So now let's look at Marie Antoinette, right? And her twin. So Marie Antoinette married Louis XVI in about 1793. She was about 13, 14, I think, when they got married, maybe 15 when they got married. She was 19 when she became queen. She was known as an opulent spender, all right? She wore fancy gowns, expensive jewelry. She had lots of shoes. She did very elaborate hairdos. And she spent her nights gambling and partying when her husband went to bed early. All the while, the peasants were suffering because they were, the taxes were being raised over and over again because France was constantly fighting a number of wars, right? So that was putting the hurt on the commoners. Now, when God is saying repetitive things in your dreams too, that's something else to remember. So remember my World War I dream. He is reiterating the idea that we are in war, and you're going to see a lot of parallels right now in what I'm talking about and what we are experiencing right now. That is important. God is drawing a direct parallel here. All right, so the commoners were being taxed so much that it was hard for them to afford bread. And the rumor goes that this went to the queen, that the commoners didn't have enough money to buy bread to eat. And she said, well, just let them eat cake, right? That did not go over well with the commoners. And it kind of sparked the French Revolution. You should be seeing the idea that elites are have opulent lifestyles. They are spending like crazy, and that they are making having to raise taxes to support that, and that puts a hurt on other people. If you're not experiencing that right now, I don't know what to tell you, because I think everybody here in America is experiencing that, and we're seeing that, and it's not going over very, very well. What else is interesting is that when God showed me in my dream that Marie Antoinette was riding through town shouting off with their heads, and she had a sword, she looked an awful like Paul Revere. And he's saying, listen, that was a revolution, and this is a French Revolution. Marie Antoinette was at the very beginning of the French Revolution for them, and you are in a revolution now. There are parallels. Like, America's back in a revolution. It looks different, and we have to fight it differently, but it is still a revolution. What is interesting at this time is that on August 26th, the French wrote a Declaration of the Right of Men, which declared that all men are free and equal, which is parallel to what we have here, that all men are created equal. All right, so that is also an underlying thing that God wants us to pay attention to. Is like, hey, you are free. You need to remain, or you need to break free, and you guys are equal, even with these people who think they're elite and above you and rule you, because he's going to talk about this. So at this time, the king and queen rode off, pretending to be commoners to escape the wrath of the commoner, but they could not imitate the commoner. We're seeing this. The elites are like, oh, we're just like you, but no, you're not. You don't act like us. You don't spend like us. You don't think like us. Nope, you're not us. All right, so they were captured. King Louis got beheaded, and 9 months later, Marie Antoinette got beheaded, and the French Revolution got its legs. Excuse the pun. The king and queen got beheaded. They got their legs from underneath them. Okay, so the French Revolution was off and running, and during this time, the Reign of Terror was happening. So a lot of the commoners were suspicious of each other. They accused their neighbors. Oh, we're seeing that today, aren't we? The government is even calling you to kind of tattle on each other, right? And report each other. And even on some social medias, they're like, if that person seems radical, report them. So we are kind of seeing our own version of the Reign of Terror. Now, Napoleon rose to power at this time. This is very interesting, okay? They wanted change, they got change, it wasn't great change. So we need to pay attention that we are wanting change. We need to make sure that we're going to fill it with the right change. And God is saying, you need to fill it with me, all right? I need to be the change that happens. So This is also interesting. With Napoleon, in order to finance his wars, he had to sell off part of the territory in the United States. In order for us to have the money to buy the territories, we had to borrow the money from the Bank of England. All right, so the Bank of England gave us the money so that Napoleon can use that money to invade England. So they were basically financing their own invasion. That sounded a lot like what God was revealing in that World War I dream, when he was saying World War I was the time that banks figured out that war was good for business, that they became richer when we were in war, and so did the elites. So God is reiterating that theme here too. So at this point, God goes, you went far enough down the rabbit hole. Let's talk about the off with their heads portion of it. All right. I mean, God was giving me download after download. It was incredible. So this was the end of the French monarchy, and we're going into the French Empire at this point. All right, so let's look at the Queen of Hearts. She was the one that said, off with their heads. So you got two Paul Revere looking people who were Marie Antoinette, twin Marie Antoinettes, saying, and they were paralleling the Queen of Hearts off with their head phrase. All right, I cannot make this stuff up. I mean, God, if you don't understand that God is creating these dreams, I can't help you, because there's no way my brain could have been creative in drawing all these parallels. All right, so Lewis Carroll, which is interesting because you have King Louis, and now God brings in Lewis Carroll, wrote Alice's Adventure in Wonderland, and that is where we meet the Queen of Hearts. Now, if you remember, I only saw this movie once, and it's because God started giving me dreams of Alice in Wonderland themed dreams, and I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen the movie. So I watched the movie, and he's still giving me these Alice in Wonderland themed dreams, which is interesting. Okay, so in that original book, the Queen of Hearts was actually a playing card, all right? And if you know the Through the Looking Glass, I don't know, but this is just came up in my studies. The Red Queen parallels the Queen of Hearts. She was originally a chess piece. So there is an idea of gaming and strategy. And God is saying, you guys need to come up with a strategy to win this revolutionary war that you are fighting, because it's a whole different thing. All right. So the Queen of Hearts was demanding. She's egotistical. She is domineering. She throws tantrums, and she yells off with her head. She also says, all the ways about here belong to me. Okay, she's saying, I rule this. I decide what is going on here. Now, if you remember in my other dream talking about Alice in Wonderland, I talk about how God is saying that Alice in Wonderland is a land of nonsense. Up is down, down is up, right is wrong, wrong is right. And that is exactly what we're living here, okay? We are living in a world of nonsense where a lot of things do not make sense. Right is wrong, wrong is right. It's not good. But what God is also saying is that there is a perceived power in the Alice Queen of Hearts. There's a perceived power. She thinks she has power over everybody, and she can just behead people whenever she wants to. But it's only perceived, because the guards, the executioners who take the people away after she orders their head to come off, it never happens. No one gets beheaded. It's a perceived power. Now, if those executioners stood up and said, we're not going to do it, that perceived power would be exposed, because the queen literally could not do anything. She can't even hide the idea that she does not have power. Very similar to Marie Antoinette. She thought she had power, but that power was taken away as soon as the people revolted. It was a perceived power. They lived under that oppression until they decided not to live under that oppression anymore. Very similar to on A Bug's Life, when the main grasshopper or main ant pushed back against the main grasshopper. And the grasshopper's minions looked at him and said, Hopper, why don't we just let it be? And he's like, No, because once they realize there's more of them than us, we're done. And that's what God is saying in all of this, is that there is a perceived power that we are choosing to live under that doesn't exist. And if we can band together and rise up and go, no, that is not your lane to rule, that's my lane to rule, then it doesn't exist anymore. Then we're only subservient to whom we choose, and I choose God. And he's the only one that rules over me. So that is what God is saying here. He is announcing through the Paul Revere symbol, he is announcing that there's only perceived power. We choose who has the power over us, but we have to work together to cut it off at the head, to cut the control off at the head. And so that's why he was saying off with their head. He said, you need to figure out where the control is stemming and you need to cut it off there. So what does that look like? What does that look like? Because it feels a little defeating, isn't it? So we know that the president doesn't have power, and he knew that. And so that's when he said, OSHA, you're going to implement the mandatory you-know-what. And we're like, well, what's OSHA going to do? Well, OSHA said, well, we're going to fine you all these thousands of dollars for every instance. And then I was thinking, well, what are you going to do if they don't pay? Let's say a bazillion businesses, all the businesses say, we're not going to play by your rules because they're unconstitutional, so we're not going to do it. You're going to haul us all off to jail. I think that luckily the Supreme Court stood up and was constitutional this time and said it is not constitutional for them to do that. But we have to look at, what if they didn't? We need to take that control. We need to stand up for what the Constitution actually says. Luckily, we didn't have to go about that route, but there are instances where we will and where we have to. So God went on and told me, you have to stop being controlled by money. All right? That is really hard in our world because most of us have done. All right? Including me. So there are times where we can't speak up at our job because we don't want to lose our job, and we need our job to put food on the table and to pay our mortgage and pay our debt, right? And God said you need to start thinking about how to get out of that, because that's an enslavement. I see this with churches. Churches who have chosen to go down the 501c3 route. They are then dependent on that tax-free exemption, and they can't preach the truth. They can only preach what they are allowed to preach. And coming from a church who is a 501c3 to a church who is not, their sermons are very, very different. Very different. One, you can tell feels free to preach the truth, unadulterated, pure as pure can be, doesn't mince words. And the other one has to walk a fine line. And therefore, the truth doesn't really get out. We see this in hospitals, all right? The hospitals have to mandate the you-know-what, because if they don't, then they lose Medicare, Medicaid funding. Well, then they would go bankrupt, all right? So they're controlled by the money. We see this with TV stations. So 70%, 75% of their income comes from Big Pharma. So they are at Big Pharma's will, and they will say whatever Big Pharma wants them to say. Otherwise, they will not get 70% of their income that they need, and then they would go under. So the mighty dollar are the reins. All right, and God gave me that. He said the mighty dollar is what reigns and are the reins. We have to be independent from what controls us. All right, so that's what he was saying in all of that. Then he goes to the model train. So if you remember, I was looking at the model train. It was cut in half. There were people in the train that came from the wedding that They were the survivors, and then they had the decapitated people inside the train, and they were riding home. But it was a model train, so it was staying still. And God said, people are paralyzed by fear. A union cannot happen between the people in order to carry out a revolution, because people are submitting to fear. They are fearful. They are in shock. They are fearful, and they're not going anywhere. And that's what God is saying. So what do we do about this? So God sat down and was like, listen, you need to push back. You as a people need to push back. You need to call it out, and you need to gain that your own control back, the control they should never have had in the first place. So let me tell you a story. So my husband and I went to Vegas. We got to Vegas. We wore a mask on the plane, didn't wear it at the airport much. Wore it on the plane because we had to. We didn't want to be those people on the news. And we landed in Vegas, and we didn't wear it at all. So we went to check into our hotel room, and there were several people in line that weren't wearing their mask, all male. I was the only female. They came up to us because I was a female and knew that I probably would submit because they don't know how strong I am and so and how stubborn I am. And they're like, you got to put your mask on. And I was like, no, I have a medical condition. And he looked at my husband. He goes, I have a medical condition too. I said, do you want to see our doctor's note? Because we came prepared. And he goes, oh, no. We don't want to see your doctor's note. Because he knows, I know that he knows that if he sees my doctor's note, he's held liable over protected health information. He goes, well, I'm going to call security. I said, call security. That's not going to intimidate me. Okay, I know that Vegas is a mob's area. You ain't intimidating me. So he gets on his radio. He's like, oh, I'm calling security. And they came over with the manager. And they're like, oh, we need you to put on your mask. I said, we both have health conditions. We cannot wear a mask. And Dustin pulls out Nevada law and says that, hey, you have to accommodate. If you don't like us not wearing a mask, you have to accommodate. He goes, well, no, we don't have to accommodate because we're a private entity. It is up to you. I was like, no, I know ADA law because I work for a school. And we have to provide the accommodation for our school for the person who needs accommodation. So if you do not have a face shield, not our problem. And Dustin knew that they were backed in the corner and was more gracious than I would have been and said, listen, we're going to go check in. We're going to go up to our room. And that's going to be it. And they let us. Because we knew the law. We knew the law. Same thing with schools. When schools started implementing face masks, I went up there with the law and said, according to USC Code 360 BBB-3, and according to the Nuremberg Code, you have no authority to put a mask over my child. You don't. And you won't. And that is it. I walked into all the stores in Vegas, and whenever they confronted me, I said, I have a health condition. If you want to see my doctor's note, I can tell you, but according to the law, you are not allowed to make me wear it, or you have to provide an accommodation. And do you want me to spend my money here? And they're like, oh, let me talk to my manager. Come on in. So I went on in. Guess what? Manager never showed up because they know the law. And if you know the law, then that helps you take away their perceived power. Okay? Same thing as these schools trying to impose different restrictions for people who are you know what and those who are you know not what. If you are Voldemorted, you can come back back to school. You don't have to quarantine. You don't have to wear a mask. Those type of things compared to people who are not Voldemorted. They have a whole different restrictions. You know what? Those people are breaking federal law. They are breaking federal law. Code Regulation 21, Section 50-23.24. Guess what? You cannot coerce somebody to do that experimental you know what by putting mandates on one people and not another. You can't have unequal treatment. You can't, according to Code Regulation 21. So these people are breaking federal law and laws that could imprison them. So these schools that are doing this, nope. You should know your law better than me. I'm just a person who just studies, who's a nerd. And that God gives me just grace and he gives me great information so that I can knock down that perceived power. Those power, the people who are grabbing that power, shame on you, especially if you're Christians. You should not be grabbing the power that does not belong to you. All right. God doesn't stop it. So he's saying, know your rights, memorize them, show them that you have the control. In my dreams, he runs boot camp dreams for my children, and he puts in scenarios where they have to repeat the same thing over and over again. He does that with me, and it's mainly spouting off laws, spouting off knowledge. He said, that's your role in life, is to educate people by taking your control and breaking down their perceived control that is not theirs. And so he runs these dreams where I have to spout off these facts. No joke. All right. So he goes on and he told me, he goes, never give anyone control. Because Jesus never gave anybody the control that they shouldn't have had. Even when they nailed him to the cross, when they killed him, it was because of his choice. He allowed it. He had the control the whole time. He was our ultimate model in this. And that all came from that dream. God is amazing, and he's telling us to rise up. Rise up. Be bold. Take back your control. Recognize it's only perceived control and call it out. It's the Jezebel spirit of wanting to have that control and doing whatever they can to get that control. It is up to us to call it out and take it back. And he's inviting us, rise up. Be a revolutionary. We're going to look back on history, and our great grandkids are going to look at us and go, what was your role? I always wondered what I would be like if I felt like I was born in the wrong time period, that I felt like I needed to be born in World War II. Now I'm seeing that God put me in this time period because it parallels World War II. What you are doing now is what you would have done if you were in Nazi Germany during World War II. Are you defending people because of unlawful acts? Are you defending people from unlawful acts? Are you rising up? Are you putting things on the line? Are you speaking out? Are you protecting them? Are you shielding them? Are you finding workarounds to protect them? Or are you ratting on your neighbor and saying, he's not wearing a mask? He's not, you know what? Put down the laws. So what if they get fired? Because how you are acting now, what would have been during World War II. That's how you would have acted. And I am dedicated, when I have great-grandchildren, to proudly say what I did in this hour. I'm going to be that revolutionary that God is calling all of us to be. He wants us to wake up out of this nonsensical world and realize who really has the power, and we need to take it back. All right, I know that was a long one. I'm sorry. That was 4 pages worth. All right, going to Shalom.